Well, we got a new drug commission, and we have a couple of people already that we know of that are supposed to be in charge of this commission. One of them being Chris Christie, and then the other one being Pam Bondi. Um, Pam Bondi, if you don't know, is the Attorney General in Florida. And Chris Christie, if you don't know, is the prohibitionist mayor. I'm sorry. He just looks like one of those mayor, when you picture the stereotypical mayor that's the crony capitalist kingpin of kingpins. He just has that look. Big pig looking nose, just totally just disregard for anything, don't respect anybody, don't care about nothing. And prohibitionist extraordinaire. Pam Bondi in Florida ran the pill mills out of town and ushered in the heroin epidemic that they have now. And Chris Christie, well, they got a little mixed bag of all that shit there in New Jersey, and they got the worst medical marijuana program in existence. I say that about everybody, so don't feel bad, New Jersey. And on top of all that, he has this situation going on that I did a story about where rehabilitation places are run by government officials. And, basically it's like a slush fund for people that are trying to help people by sending them to rehab instead of jail, and especially for marijuana. And it's a big corrupt nightmare because nobody's getting help and everybody's going through more misery than they need to. And meanwhile, the politicians are lining their pockets. And it's like a little crony capitalism game they play with the pharmaceutical industry, because these treatment centers are using alternative drugs as replacement therapy and stuff. It's just all kinds of disastrous. So I don't know what Chris Christie and Pam Bondi are planning on doing with the opioid crisis that we already have. Maybe they're planning on switching it over to a full-blown heroin crisis. Because, let's face it, we're never going to win the war on drugs as long as the drugs are being brought into America, obviously by America. Like, how does this heroin get here? What's all the heroin growing? It's all grown in Afghanistan now. We have our troops over there protecting all the crops. I don't know. I don't see how the heroin problem is going to ever end. And it sounds like they got more heroin than they know what to do with, so they need to cut down on the prescription pills and replace that with heroin with their replacement. I don't know what's going on, but you can speculate a lot about what they're doing behind the scenes or what they're talking about. This commission is garbage, man. First of all, why? Why another commission? We already have drug czar, we have the DEA, we have the National Institute on Drug Abuse, National Institute on Health. We got a whole handful of organizations that are already supposed to be working on these problems. We got the deadliest crisis in the U.S. history. All right, I'm going to skim through some of this. Let's see. The President's Commission on Combating Drug Addiction and the Opioid Crisis will focus on putting together a report due in the fall on the opioid crisis and potential solutions to it. The Commission will identify existing federal funding for the epidemic, locate places that have limited drug treatment options, review opioid addiction prevention strategies, and make recommendations to the President to improve the federal response to the addiction and the opioid crisis. Say that again. You're going to what? Make a report due out in the fall. So how much money is this whole thing costing? All you're doing is making a report. There's already reports, as I will talk about somewhere in this article I remember reading. There's already a report that was made in 2014. The problem really hasn't gotten too much worse since 2014. I mean, we had a 300% increase in prescription opioid sales in the U.S. since 1999. but without a corresponding change in the amount of pain reported by patients or the amount of prescriptions that patients received. In fact, I would argue that since medical marijuana has been blowing up since 2008, from then on to now, in the last 10 years or so, you probably had less of the prescriptions being written for opioids, and yet more people are still doing them and getting them, and there's still more of them on the street. So how is this happening? I think the control valve is these pharmaceutical companies need to stop cranking out billions of pills and dumping them on America. And there's another statistic you might be interested in. America, which isn't, if you look at the population of the world, America is just a tiny little dot on the map. Yet we consume 80% of the world's opioids. 80% of all the Oxycontins and all the hydrocodone pills. 80% of all the fentanyl. 80% of all the heroin. 80% of all the opioids. All of them. It's ridiculous. How is it even possible? We don't grow opium over here. We don't even have production facilities where we manufacture half this shit. Except for, of course, the pills. That we are, I mean, you just seen the DEA give special treatment to incest therapeutics. They're halfway responsible for the fentanyl deaths that you see in the news. They're the only people in the pharmaceutical, big pharma that we always bitch about, they're the only ones that lobbied against marijuana legalization in 2016. And in that, they threw $500,000 to keep marijuana illegal in Arizona and was successful in that bid. And Arizona happens to be their home state of Incest Therapeutics Incorporated. So I'm going to keep bitching about them. Don't worry about that. You guys get to go ahead and make cannabinoids, well, specifically synthetic THC, into some kind of a mouth spray or nasal thing. The funny part about it is they get a Schedule 2 for that, for synthetic THC. Yet, we are talking about natural cannabis, which has never killed anybody and is not dangerous or addictive. We can't even get a Schedule 2 for that. Nope, we don't get Schedule 2 for that. In fact, we get Schedule 1, and you don't get to research it. And if you do research it, they send you some garbage to research because they want your research to be garbage. All right, we don't know exactly who all is going to be in this commission. It doesn't matter. How many people do you actually need to write a fucking report? All right, so they got this report supposedly due around October or something. In 3 months, they're supposed to have a preliminary report. This is ridiculous, kind of, really. I don't know what the point of any of it is, really. So Christie can feel like he's doing something, and this Pam Bondi lady, she's been wanting to uproot from Florida and move to D.C. ever since she patted herself on the back for all that opioid curbing. I mean, it's just trading one thing for another, which is what the people that get the pills eventually have to do anyway because they can't afford those pills. They're expensive. And now you got doctors cutting people off left and right. Christie is a natural pick for the commission due to his support for Trump since 2016 campaign. He ran against Trump. They were enemies, and then after he lost, he became Trump's little ass-kissing puppet boy. But anyway, Christie has long spoken about treating addiction as a primary public health problem instead of a criminal justice issue. Yeah, we'll tell that to the thousands of people that get arrested each year for these drug crimes in New Jersey. And when you go to their treatment facilities, you'll find marijuana addiction flyers and pamphlets and shit. Because they're not serious about treating addicts. They're serious about making money. They don't give a shit about addicts. And the addicts, they go back to the drugs about 90% of the time in New Jersey's treatment facilities that he's so proud of, or he thinks that, or he acts like he's doing, which he's not. It's just the corrupt money thing I was talking about earlier. He's dedicated in the past year as governor in large part to confronting the epidemic, recently signing a law that restricts opioid painkiller prescriptions. One of Christie's friends struggled with addiction, which seems to have pushed him to take on the epidemic in a compassionate, serious way. And that's what we always hear about Republicans, is they don't act on something that benefits the people until it affects them personally. You know, you see this all the time. And I mean, it's with all politicians, but Republicans are notorious for it because they're usually nowhere as near the people with issues. You know, like you had, Liz Cheney. Dick Cheney is her dad. He's kind of came around and was for gay marriage eventually. Not Liz Cheney. She's the one that's gay, and she's not even for gay marriage. So I don't know. Sometimes you just got to scratch your head. And when the opioid question comes up, the only Republicans that seem to be like saying anything other than lock them up and enforcement and prevention is people that are directly affected by it. So whatever comes of the commission, it's long overdue. The opioid epidemic has led to the biggest drug overdose crisis in U.S. history, with more than 560,000 people, more than the entire population of Atlanta, dying from drug overdoses between 1999 and 2015. The Obama administration and Congress previously took some steps to try to combat the crisis, but experts have long argued that there's a desperate need for way more than anything they've tried. How about stop with all the opioids, man, all the pills and all the fentanyls and incest therapeutics? They're under investigation by the FBI for basically just giving their fentanyl to anybody that wanted it. And then they would in turn be lying about, having cancer, because you have to have cancer to get it. So therefore they're lying to the insurance companies. They're lying to the DEA about their, need for the prescription. Somehow they get to still operate. They're still selling fentanyl. It's still on the market. Their mouth spray that's killing people every fucking day. That's where the opioid epidemic starts, man. And once these people that are out there get accustomed to those fentanyl mouth sprays, then yeah, they got to go to heroin, because that shit's expensive and it's strong. It's stronger. It's 50 times stronger than morphine. Trump has been talking about this shit. He acknowledged the horrors of the opioid epidemic on the campaign trail, calling it a tragedy and laying out some policy ideas for stopping the crisis. Most of his talk is focused on tougher border security measures, including his wall, to stop the flow of narcotics in the U.S., but experts widely argue that such measures would fall short of dealing with the epidemic, not least because most opioid overdose deaths are linked to painkillers that are legally prescribed and obtained, sometimes through the black market within the U.S. So it ain't like people are buying crates full of pills from Mexico, and the Mexican mafias Mexican drug cartels are banking big on selling Mexican fentanyl underground. No, this is people getting prescribed this shit. That's how they get addicted, and then they go on to fucking heroin. Or they just keep getting the fentanyl and they die from that. Or the Oxycontin or the Percocets or whatever. So what do we have here? Okay, according to the 2014 data, at least 89% of the people who met the definition for drug abuse disorder didn't get treatment. There's your problem right there. You don't need a report due in October. That's the problem right there. You keep throwing people in jail and thinking you can put the problem to rest like that. It's not happening. Patients with drug abuse disorders are also often complain of weeks or months-long waiting periods for care. In the meantime, they pretty much die as a result. That's what happened to Prince. Obama administration took some steps to provide more treatment options, such as unlocking more than $100 million in funding for drug treatment in 2016. Congress in late 2016 approved a $1 billion over 10 years for drug treatment to combat the opioid epidemic. Trump's policy proposals to this point, however, have not done anything to fill this gap. His recent budget plan wouldn't increase funding for drug treatment above what Congress already approved. In fact, Trump has proposed $100 million in cuts to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration mental health block grants, which could ultimately impact some addiction services. You don't give a shit about the addicts. He never did, man. A bunch of campaign promises when he was in the Rust Belt. Because another side effect of shipping jobs to Mexico and China and shipping in the fucking heroin from Afghanistan is everybody gets hooked on dope. You got the whole communities, whole towns, whole cities are under rust and heroin all over the Midwest. It's a nightmare. Everywhere you go, every town is wiped out from this shit. Anyway, Trump, he hasn't even paid any attention to this shit. So since he's been there, he hasn't nominated a permanent director of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, commonly referred to as the drug czar. We've never really seen the drug czar have that much of an impact, and usually when asked, they usually don't have anything to say about Schedule 1 marijuana, so who cares about that? But still, it just shows that he ain't really doing anything in the way of really caring about the drug problem. There's similar vacancies in other agencies that deal with drug addiction, including the Center for Disease Control and Prevention and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. With the way the Trump administration has been operating, those things might even just get cut so they can spend more money on the military. All right, here's a guy that's complaining. Keith Humphreys, a drug policy expert at Stanford, praised Christie's appointment, I don't know why, to the commission, but he argued that Trump shouldn't prioritize filling old positions over establishing a new commission. We have multiple positions in government that can do all the things that already. Instead, a new layer of government is being created with no infrastructure or historical memory. And he argued much of what Trump's tasking the commission to do was already done by the Surgeon General's 2016 addiction report. Okay, that was even more recent, like last year. Quote, there is no need to reinvent the wheel with another planning and evaluation process. Just pick up the Surgeon General's report and act on it. In 2015, more Americans died of drug overdose than any other year on record. More than 52,000 deaths just in 1 year. And then they tell you that that's higher than the more than 38,000 who died in car crashes, or the 36,000 who died from gun violence, or the 43,000 who died from HIV AIDS during that epidemic's peak in 1995. How about Viet Nam? I mean, people thought of Viet Nam as the biggest quagmire in American foreign policy history, and that's all they talked about for the last 30, 40 years. That's how many people died, American soldiers in Vietnam. About 52,000, 55,000, 50-ish thousand. Yet, that's 1 year of drug overdoses in America. What? The latest drug epidemic is not solely about illegal drugs, it's also about legal drug. Back in the 90s, doctors were persuaded to treat pain as a serious medical issue, because it is. There's a good reason for that. About 1 in 3 Americans suffer from chronic pain, according to a 2011 report from Institute of Medicine. I'm one of them, and it sucks. But I'll tell you what, medical marijuana is awesome for pain, and it's never a nightmare like opioids. Never a nightmare. Doesn't lead to heroin. Pharmaceutical companies took advantage of this concern through a big marketing campaign. They got doctors to prescribe products like OxyContin and Percocet in droves. Even though the evidence for opioids treating long-term chronic pain is very weak, despite their effectiveness in short-term acute pain, while the evidence that opioids cause harm in the long term is very strong and very easy to figure out. So painkillers, because once you take them for a couple of days, they stop really working that good. You got to take more and more of them. Then you start feeling sick when you don't take them. It's called addiction setting in. Painkillers proliferated, landing in the hands of not just patients, but also teens rummaging through their parents' medicine cabinets and other family members and friends of the patients and the black market. As a result, opioid overdose deaths trended up, sometimes involving opioids alone, other times involving drugs like alcohol and benzodiazepine, Xanaxes. which, yeah, that's prescribed to relieve anxiety, and about 25 other things that I can think of without even trying. I mean, they basically throw Xanax at anybody that comes in there not smiling. And it's sad. They've been doing that since before the 90s, since the 60s, from what I understand. But anyway, by 2015, opioid overdose deaths totaled more than 33,000, close to two-thirds of all drug overdose deaths. Because it's more, there's more. Opioid painkillers minus synthetic opioids. Non-methadone synthetic opioids, particularly fentanyl. And it's a smaller class of drugs by a long shot, but they're far more deadly than just regular everyday, hydrocodones or your Vicodins or Percodans. Those fentanyl and others are really strong, really dangerous. Oh yeah, and heroin way down at the bottom there. It kind of keeps up with the non-methadonal synthetics, but right now we're trending up with those and down with heroin. So this is an old chart. Law enforcement threatened doctors with incarceration and lost their license if they prescribed drugs unscrupulously. So now doctors are afraid to prescribe this stuff, and there's so many reasons why people are turning to heroin because of what's going on with the pharmaceutical problem. Not all painkillers went this way. Not all opioid users started with painkillers, but statistics suggest many did. A 2014 study in the Journal of American Medical Associations of Psychiatry found that many painkiller users were moving on to heroin. A 2015 analysis by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention found that people who are addicted to prescription painkillers are 40 times more likely to be addicted to heroin. So other types of opioid overdoses, excluding painkillers, also rose. That doesn't mean cracking down on painkillers was a mistake. It appears to slow the rise in painkiller deaths, and it may have prevented doctors from prescribing the drug to new generations of people with drug use disorders. But the likely solution is to get opioid users into treatment, so federal and state officials have pushed for more treatment funding, including medication-assisted treatment like methadone and Suboxone. Some states like Louisiana and Indiana have taken a tough-on-crime approach that focuses on incarcerating drug traffickers. But the incarceration approach has been around for decades, and it hasn't stopped massive drug epidemics like the current opioid crisis. Trump's new commission offers a chance to establish more funding, coordination, and guidance behind these mixed federal and state efforts. Now the country will have to wait over the next few months to see what exactly the commission produces. It's going to produce a piece of paper or two. I watched the whole video, where the White House video about the commission, and I got a couple things to say about it. First thing is, to be honest, I'm kind of glad to see this. Like, when is the last time you've seen the President of the United States sit around the table with drug addicts and people that are trying to actually figure out what to do about this opioid pill death thing, whatever you want to call it? It's a serious situation. We need to get out in front of it. I was pretty happy to see that. And another thing I was happy to see is that they never talked about marijuana. That's usually the go-to thing. Oh, we have a bad problem with this opioid epidemic. Let's crack down on marijuana. So that never came up, at least in the video of the 30 minutes that I saw. And then there was the one thing I didn't really know if I really like or not is in the panel there was 3 people who had run-ins with addiction or whatever. The first person was a female who was an addict, is a recovering addict and whatnot. But then the second one was another individual who will say is a successful person because he now owns a rehabilitation facility. I believe the first 2 people are from New Jersey, maybe even the third lady too. The third lady lost her son, unfortunately, to overdose after 3 I think he was in and out of treatment 3 times, if I remember correctly. Now, I feel bad for this lady. My heart goes out to you. However, she used this platform to promote treatment facilities, which is getting to be it's getting to be a pretty popular thing. I'm seeing more about is treatment facilities. The government is, flirting with the idea of funding these treatment facilities more. And this lady defended them, even though her son had been in and out of 3 of them and still overdosed on drugs and died. So I don't know where she was praising them, what they supposedly did to help anybody. I'm not saying at all that they're not helping anybody. 10% of people at least are getting help that I know of. So anyway, there was a little bit more to this story. We have Bondi, Pam Bondi, Florida Attorney General. She's on this panel as well because she's going to try to take her what she did in Florida to the national stage, I guess. Yeah, right here. Bondi will join former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who will lead the commission to search for solutions to the opioid abuse nationwide. Well, she can't shut down all the pill mills because, first of all, Florida was the only place I know of that that had them. There's pill mills everywhere. A pill mill is basically just a place that has more than one doctor, and they're just more than willing to prescribe more than anything that you want them to. Here's some quotes. First from her. Thousands of Americans die each year from drug overdoses. Quote, I want to thank the President of the United States, Governor Christie, and many others for caring about this deadly epidemic. Trump said the commission would fight back against drug addiction nationwide, an epidemic that claims thousands of lives each year. Quote, we want to battle drug addiction and combat opioid addiction. We have to do it. That Trump, man, I tell you, he's got words. And then Christie explained the commission would take their role seriously in defeating drug addiction in the United States. Quote, I'm thrilled to work with the Attorney General on the issues of prevention and addiction to drugs so we don't get people hooked on drugs in the first place. Christie said addiction is a disease. Now, I am not a big fan of the government talking about prevention. They suck at it. They are not experts at prevention. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. When they talk about prevention, they generally are speaking about marijuana. We got to crack down on marijuana has been their prevention model for the last 40 years. So that's a little bit of a eyebrow raiser. Addiction is a disease. It's also, you got to take this shit more seriously, guys. One of the biggest undertakings of Bondi's career as Florida Attorney General has been cracking down on Florida's pill mills and drug abuse in the Sunshine State. I wouldn't say drug abuse. She's cracked down on the pill mills. Under Bondi's rule, the state shut down most of its pain clinics where doctors routinely illegally prescribed oxycodone pills. Bondi has touted the pill mill crackdown as one of the highlights of her 7-year term as Attorney General. That no-nonsense approach has resulted in another crisis for Florida, however, a heroin abuse epidemic which only seems to grow as time goes on. The heroin epidemic is especially problematic in South Florida, where numbers of overdoses have skyrocketed, rising to the levels comparable to the prescription pill abuse epidemic of 2010. Some studies show that since Bondi's pill mill crackdowns, Florida heroin deaths have increased significantly, jumping as high as 1,250%. To give you an idea, that's about 10 times an increase. You might even want to say it's 12 and a half times increase, kind of is. But it's, roughly 10 times more. So if you had 100 people that died from heroin one year, now you have 1,000 people that died. It's a pretty intense increase. As for now, Bondi will lend a helping hand to the commission trying to replace her pill mill crackdown or replicate her pill mill crackdown on the national scale with the country's opiate addiction crisis. Maybe. So she takes her model of shutting down these pain management clinics nationwide, and in comes the heroin. It's already coming in. Will it come in more? Will it come in less? Are you stemming the tide of addiction enough by shutting down easy access to the opioid pills? I don't know. But that's all I got for this. It's not much, man. I mean, all right, we got 16,000 deaths in the U.S. attributed to opioid pain relievers in 2013. That's 4 times the number of such deaths that was in 1999. And one more thing, as far as the gateway drug thing that they always, now we're talking about prevention again because Republicans, they always talk about prevention. Prevention is worth, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That doesn't happen in real politics and real things. You can't prevent things by dreaming of ways to prevent it and just hoping that it works. So whatever you think that you're going to do in this whole prevention realm, good luck with that. I'm not holding my breath that you have anything that's going to do prevention any better than you ever had before. You got your Just Say No programs and your crackdown on marijuana. 1 in 15 people who use prescription opioids for non-medical reasons will try heroin in the next 10 years.